What is up, guys? Welcome back to CageChat MMA. We're here for the Uriah Hall versus Anderson Silva. The preview, of course, is UFC Vegas 12 on Halloween, so pardon if you can hear the fireworks in the background. But we are here. Anderson Silva, the Spider, is going to make the walk into the Octagon for the very last time. But before we get into that, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you're on the YouTube channel. Make sure to hit follow if you're on Facebook as well. We're on 1,700 followers now. So a fantastic turnout after UFC 254 last weekend. But we go from potentially the newest member into the greatest of all time debate, into maybe the first. Anderson Silva comes in tonight, 34-10. He's been there, done everything. UFC 200 against DC, stood on very short notice after John Jones, another fighter who's been in that GOAT conversation this week, and that number one pound for pound. He stood in once John Jones had tested positive, of course, that week. And saved that event, albeit lost to DC over 5 rounds. He's come into this. He's the greatest middleweight of all time. The idol of the current middleweight champion, Israel Adesanya. Of course, those two fought in 2019 or 2018 even. 2019. Sorry, 2019 in February, of course. Before Israel Adesanya went on that tear, beat Gaston for the interim title, of course, and then went on to defeat Robert Whittaker for the undisputed. But it's a bitter moment. Obviously, I came to the sport quite recently, 2016, late 2016. So I've missed the peak and the best Anderson Silva that we've seen. The one that pulled out the arm triangle, in that last minute against Chelsea. The highlights that we've seen, the 16-fight win streak that he went on, that record still is withstanding today, and not really many are coming close to it. I don't think anyway, but. It's kind of touching, and obviously we've got to be thankful to the UFC that we are getting these events and we're getting to see these huge names fight week in, week out at the moment. But it is a little somber and a little sad that one we didn't see as we did last week. Khabib and McGregor potentially stepped down for the final time out that Octagon. Albeit these two are on very different. Almost past when they're announcing that they're leaving. Obviously, Anderson Silva, maybe you could say, has gone a little too long. But last week, Khabib left his gloves in the Octagon with no fans in attendance. And this week, maybe Anderson Silva is going to be doing the same. We're going to be losing two of probably Mount Rushmore's, faces that we're going to put up there for MMA for the next, decade or so. But it is sad. Obviously, Uriah Hall's coming to this, and he's someone who hasn't seen too much of the limelight this week. Obviously, that's understandable with Anderson Silva being his last fight. You'd expect Anderson Silva, the name and the legacy that he's leaving and pathed himself throughout the UFC is going to get much more attention, similarly to how Ronda Rousey and Amanda Nunes got their attention at UFC 207. This is very similar with Ronda Rousey. With the return of Ronda Rousey coming back, she got all that feedback and that attention, that advertisement, and that promotion that the UFC put out. Whereas Amanda Nunes almost went under the radar, and once fight night came, she showed what she's about. Maybe Uriah Hall can do the same, perhaps. Uriah Hall, if he's read the script tonight, he'll lay on his shield and take the loss tonight and let Anderson Silva walk out with a win. But, this isn't WWE. There isn't scripts in this game, albeit sometimes, we reference the MMA gods giving us this and not giving us that. Tony Ferguson and Khabib being a prime example of that, which it looks like we're never going to get now. But Uriah Hall, he pulls out the spectacular sometimes. When I've seen him, at least, he's someone who I feel fights very much on emotion based on how his mental side that is on fight now, whether he's coming in happy or angry. And I feel that's happened a couple of times in a couple of his wins and losses before. I think, that build up, I believe, to the Jacare fight, perhaps he basically shut himself away in his gym for that camp because he was, because of COVID and that. Like, he pretty much locked him in there, lived in that gym, and unfortunately that fight got cancelled. The 3 fights he's had cancelled this year, 2 with Jacare, 1 with Romero, and of course Anderson Silva tonight is taking place on Halloween Eve inside that USD Apex. So it's gonna be interesting. One, walking out to no fans, but obviously we've got that smaller cage tonight. We know both of these are primarily stand-up fighters, strikers, of course. You can't imagine these two. I wouldn't say there's going to be a submission win tonight. It's going to be more a KO or a TKO from something spectacular these two do. But it depends on how good or how bad both of these look. Anderson Silva, of course, he looked fantastic up and within those 16 wins that he had in a row, 34-10. He looked phenomenal. But in his previous 5 fights, he's not looked fantastic. He looked decent and okay. It looks like someone who can be on the cusp of that top 15, or maybe just cutting into that top 10 perhaps. But he doesn't look like someone who's going to go on a title challenge, which is expected from someone who's now 45 years of age. And he's had some horrific injuries. That one against Jared Cannonier, where Cannonier got booed out of Brazil pretty much because of the knee injury that Anderson Silva suffered because of those leg kicks, or checking of the leg kicks at least. So it's a tough one to predict, and it's a nice main event. I almost feel like this one, it does have meaning, especially if Uriah Hall wins because of this place in the middleweight division. But it almost feels like Anderson Silva should be making the walk last. It's almost like an exhibition bout, almost, because one, I do believe this is the old school, quote unquote, of the middleweight division. We've got the new school in terms of Israel Adesanya, Paulo Costa, Robert Whittaker, Darren Till, Jack Hermansson. They're the new school, whereas Anderson Silva, Chris Weidman, you could say Yoel Romero are more of the old school. Those ones that you would have seen, they've dominated that division almost for the past 5 years. And, we'll have a quick look at the rankings, of course. I haven't actually got a graphic for that one tonight. But looking at the middleweight rankings, obviously Uriah Hall's in that top 10. And we'll have a look at their last 5 fights, of course. As I mentioned there, Uriah Hall coming in there, 3 wins out of his last 5. Those 2 losses against Paulo Costa, of course, who just challenged Israel Adesanya for the title. And, of course, the newly crowned Bellator middleweight champion, Gegard Mousasi, who fought on Thursday night against Douglas Lima. So those 2 losses aren't ones to almost be embarrassed by, but he hasn't fought this year. He hasn't fought in over a year now, and he's been on that path, hasn't he, where he's only fighting once or twice a year now, whether that's due to injuries or I do feel for Uriah Hall because I think physically, and I think we saw it on The Ultimate Fighter. We see the skill set he possesses, but we see also his major downside is his mentality going into fights, his maybe lack of belief within himself, and he doesn't always show his best side to him. But we'll have a look at those middleweight rankings, of course, and we see there Uriah Hall in the top 10. Chris Weidman is just above him. Kelvin Gastelum is above him, and Derek Brunson's above him. As you see there, Derek Brunson's the only win out of the last 5 for Anderson Silva. So those are big names, and Brunson and Gastelum was fighting for a title, or interim title at least, last year, and was supposed to be fighting Whittaker on that card that Adesanya and Anderson Silva fought on, but obviously Robert Whittaker got that horrible injury on the day of the fight, which meant that fight couldn't take place. So the middleweight division could have been on very much different terms, and it shows you how quickly this sport evolves over 12 to 18 months. But if Uriah Hall gets a win tonight, it probably sets him up with a fight against someone like Chris Weidman, Gastelum. Darren Till's got Jack Hermansson. Yoel Romero's waiting for a fight. Maybe we rebook that one, of course. Jacare Souza has obviously, I believe, gone up to the light heavyweight division now. So whether he wants to come down and fight Uriah Hall maybe to get back into the middleweight mix, we don't know. It depends on whether he wants to cut down that much weight as well. But we look there, Krzysztof Jotko, Bevon Lewis, and Antonio Carlos Jr. All very good wins there for Uriah Hall, and in different fashions as well. As you look at Anderson Silva, the last four of his last 5 fights. Sorry, I've gone to that decision. So you're probably expecting this to go 5 rounds tonight. But as Israel Adesanya, did he let him almost win? Did he let him go the distance? Did he let him have that? Because with Adesanya idolizing Anderson Silva, they maybe not wanted to hurt him or put him away too much or embarrass Anderson Silva. So those two had a little bit of fun in there. You could see both of them enjoyed their time over that 15-minute span. He beat Derek Brunson, of course, and then those 2 losses to Hall of Famers in Michael Bisping and Daniel Cormier. Many thought Anderson Silva actually beat Michael Bisping, and the fact that it was in London, in Bisping's home country, that maybe the judges were a little bit kinder to Michael Bisping, especially after that 3rd round where Anderson Silva dropped him after the mouth guard incident, and many thought that was the end of the fight there. Even Anderson Silva celebrated it, but it was the end of the round. We continued, and Michael Bisping was able to draw out that decision win and then go on to become the middleweight champion, of course. Daniel Cormier, UFC 200, of course. It wasn't the most spectacular fight. It was more the grinding result. Maybe you could draw a comparison to a Khabib fight where it's a wrestler versus a striker, and Daniel Cormier had to do what he had to do because he was expecting to fight John Jones in that camp, and then you got Anderson Silva who's coming up on late notice. Probably didn't have to cut too much weight, maybe 5-10 pounds to get to that 205 limit. I don't know what he walks around at, whether he's at 220, so he might have to cut 15 pounds at the max. But it's a change, on a short notice. It's very much a change of opposition and a change of game plan. So using his wrestling credentials is something you'd expect from Daniel Cormier with some of his now set and knowledge inside the octagon. But obviously, Not this one, of course. Uriah Hall, we'll have a look at a quick tailor tape. Hall versus Silva, 16-9, record 34-10. There is one no contest within that as well, 6 foot and 6'2", respectively. Both of them came in around that 185-pound division weight. There was no issues with their two stepping on with them two stepping on the scales on that night. Yesterday, of course, their reach is quite similar, 79.5 there for Uriah Hall, and leg reach again only half an inch in it as well. So it's a very close fight. I do expect it to be a kickboxing battle. I don't know why. I hope Anderson Silva doesn't get demolished inside 5-10 minutes within those first 2 rounds, or even if it's a prolonged beatdown similar to Gaethje and gave to Ferguson. I'd like to see Anderson Silva, because it seems very much he's not done with the sport, but maybe the sport's done with him, and we see it a lot, don't we? We see it once you get to that age, father time catches up with you. And there's only so much you can go on with. He's had 2 significant injuries now with that leg break with Chris Weidman, obviously the knee injury last year. So it'd be sad to see him suffer an injury tonight. Of that sincerity where he's out for 2 weeks, because that definitely make him almost retired there. He'd have to retire inside the cage. But if he gets a good win or an average win, you could see him doing okay in a Bellator, in a ONE FC, where Vitor Belfort moved over to, of course. But it seems like he wants to continue with the sport. But as we mentioned, maybe the sport's done with him, and maybe tonight we see him fight for the last time in MMA rather than just in the UFC. But as we've seen throughout the build-up during the week, he seems very keen on maybe continuing with the sport. If Uriah Hall wins, it's a fantastic win on his record, of course. Having Anderson Silva on your record is a fantastic feat, no matter at what point you fight him. But, if we read the script tonight, it doesn't say Uriah Hall beats Anderson Silva, does it? But obviously, we've got a comment here. Strong UFC fan from Liberia, of course. Thank you for tuning in, of course. But we're moving on now to the co-main event. Let us know your predictions down below as well, and give us your best Halloween fighter puns as well. It is Halloween tonight, so let's see what you guys can get in there. Get creative in the comments, and we'll put some of the best out. But Bryce Mitchell versus Andre Fili, of course. We move on now to what is going to be a cracking co-main event between 2 featherweights. Bryce Mitchell knows how to bring it, and he's finally got his camo pants. We'll look at the record there: 13-0, still undefeated up against 21-7. Both of them similar height, and both coming in, on weight for tonight's bout. 64-inch reach, 4-inch reach advantage there for Andre Filli, and identical leg reach. So it's going to be a very close fight. It's going to be an exciting fight, and we know what Bryce Mitchell can do. He's got a number of the submission wins on his record, and that impressive twister submission that he got on Matt Styles. He's lost in an exhibition bout against Brad Katona. So that'll only better him in his MMA career. But he's phenomenal. He's finally got his camouflage pants. He was almost what's the word? But he's been campaigning for them. That's the right word I was looking for. Campaigning for them camouflage pants from Reebok since he got into the UFC, and he's finally got a hold of them. And tonight we'll be seeing him in the cage for the first time with them. And maybe it's obviously we got the Reebok and Venom deal switching over, changing hands. Maybe it's a little insight into what Reebok, and maybe a little bit more relaxed knowing that the deal's going to come. So maybe we do see a little bit more in design. People choosing what they want in their shorts, because it's a big debate, isn't it? The whole shorts thing is a big debate where we don't see enough personality in the fighters or in the fight gear anymore. But I liked the Reebok deal. I do like the Reebok deal. I think it adds a little bit of professionalism to the sport that very much needed at the time. We was trying to get on the ESPN, we was on Fox. We were trying to get those big money deals to broaden the sport, and I think it has got there. Whereas you look at other promotions, maybe they look a little bit more, not amateur, but they look a bit more gladiatorial, a bit more gothic maybe, and a bit more, you look at it and go, well, these are just people cage fighting rather than these people competing in a sport of MMA. Because if you look at your sports, your basketballs, your NFL, you're accustomed to them wearing a particular uniform, looking a particular way. And I think the Reebok deal really did that well for the UFC, albeit it maybe restricted them with their personality. Obviously in football, you're allowed to design your boots, maybe. If you're teamed up with a Puma or Nike, you see it with Paul Pogba, for example. He might wear a custom-made boot for him on a particular game, and I think that's what we need in the UFC as well. So maybe with the Venom deal, if they can add maybe one sponsorship to the shorts, perhaps, that would be nice. As long as it's not too outlandish, too big. If it works in with the design, if they have one sponsorship on their name, of course, and then obviously the Venom and the UFC branding on there, I think that'd work well. But Bryce Mitchell, Andre Filli, that's what we're talking about tonight. And I think this one could be fight of the night. Apologies again for the fireworks that you can hear outside. We look at Andre Filli as well. Fantastic. They're just on the cusp of that UFC featherweight ranking, and they're coming in very close now. That top 15 in a winter night. Actually, I say that Bryce Mitchell is in that top 15 already, so that shows you how quickly he's risen up. And Andre Filli, should he get a winter night, would have that number 15 on his name this weekend. So a win for either of them sets up the likes of Edson Barboza, Uriah Hall, who needs to fight, Dan Ige, also needs to fight Shane Burgos. That featherweight division is stacked at the moment. We are quite top heavy in the fact that we put a lot of shine and a lot of notice on the Max Holloway's, the Brian Ortega, who got a win a couple of weeks ago now. Zabit Magomed, Sharipov, of course, and Yair Rodriguez. We're looking at those names, and Calvin Cage. You can't forget the Boston man in Calvin Cater. So it's a great time to be an MMA fan at the moment. But Bryce Mitchell tonight, I think will get it done. I think he will stick with his undefeated record. But again, Andre Filli, with that levels of experience, 28 fights now, over double of what Bryce Mitchell's had, and a lot of them have been high level competition bouts. He's lost to Michael Johnson, Calvin Cater, Sadiq Yusuf, but he's beaten Charles Jourdain, Jamon Moraes, Miles Jury, Dennis Bermudez, Artem Lobov, of course. So this one could go either way. It could really be fight of the night. I expect it to go to the whole 3 rounds. I do expect that, unless Bryce Mitchell sinks in another twister maybe. But I'd go with a Bryce Mitchell win for that one. Don't clip this up when he gets maybe floored and knocked out. But I do think Bryce Mitchell gets the win. But someone who you'd expect to get floored or expect to see a knockout is in this heavyweight division, of course. Maurice Greene versus Greg Hardy. Now, Greg Hardy is a very, very controversial fighter and figure in MMA at the moment. Obviously, he has quite a dark history and a dark past that carried him with the NFL when he came over to the Contender Series. But I understand it's very hard to go. It's hard to look at someone and go him or them in the cage and them out of the cage. It's hard to differentiate between the two, because at the end of the day, what they do outside the cage indicates what they're doing in the cage. But Greg Hardy is an absolute monster inside that cage. He's 6-2 at the moment, albeit he's had some hiccups in the cage. The whole asthma pump controversy against Ben Sosoli that got that fight turned up to a no contest, but he's got some heavy knockouts on his record. The win against Juan Adams sticks to mind. Yorgan De Castro, who beat after Yorgan De Castro, I believe, broke his hand, and also he went 5 rounds with Alexander Volkov on very short notice. And Volkov, he's an elite competitor in that top 10 of the heavyweight rankings, so that would have helped him. Obviously, Alan Crowder, that DQ that he suffered, was very naive of him in the sport that he was coming to. He was making his UFC debut, albeit had fought twice on the Contender Series previously. But he comes up against a heavyweight in terms of Maurice Greene, who's coming off a good win against Gian Vellante. Unfortunately, had 2 losses before that against Alexei Olenek and Sergey Pavlovich, of course. Both finishes their submission and the KO on his record. But again, this fight is going to be one for maybe not one for the ages, but this one is going to put a little taster on coming up to that main event, the heavyweight bout. 9-4 up against 6-2. So these are still, well, actually no, I was going to say these are still very raw in terms of their talent. But once you're in that 8-13 fight bracket, you're no longer, I don't want to say no longer a prospect, but you're not an amateur anymore. You're certified into your professional career. You should know where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are. You should be start looking to move up to that top 15 and those more elite fights, perhaps you could say. But 6'7" versus 6'5", 2 absolute giants, 258, 265, of course. And we mentioned that in a minute about maybe the splitting of the heavyweight division. I think it needs rejuvenating. 82-inch reach to 80, and quite a heavy leg reach advantage there for Maurice Greene, 47-44. But for the heavyweight division as a whole, I do think it needs revamping. I think it's almost bizarre that we have a division that you can weigh in at 207 and all the way up to 266. You've got a 60-pound differential there. And I think it is absurd that we see that in the UFC and in MMA. I think we do need a 220, maybe. In an ideal world, I'd make the heavyweight title I'd heavyweight division 240. I'd make a super heavyweight division at 260, maybe 265, keep the limit at the same, and then I'd make probably a cruiserweight at 220, 225-ish, so that you have, you could split that heavyweight and light heavyweight division into 4 different divisions, really. We see now Daniel Cormier, Stipe Miocic are that 235, 240-pound champions at the moment. And could you imagine we had Davison Figueiredo up against Israel Adesanya? Because in the heavyweight division, that differential in weight is legal and is a contracted bout. But if next week the UFC, or let's say touchwood, Alex Perez, doesn't get injured, or Alejandro Perez, can you imagine if he gets injured and Adesanya gets to come and goes, yeah, I'll fight Figueiredo for the flyweight title? People would lose their mind. But you can see it happening. John Jones can step into the cage on 207, 208, and fight Francis Ngannou, who's probably going to come in at 260. So yes, I do think it does need revamping. I think it opens up the division, because the heavyweight division at the moment is a little stale. We've had a lot of fighters that have fought each other already. Now, whether you've got the talent across the divisions within the UFC already, or you have to outsource talent, it depends on what you can get. Do you get 4 strong divisions, or do you get 4 weak divisions? So maybe you want to stick with 2 very strong competitive divisions rather than maybe 4 divisions that don't have the best of talents. We see that with the women's featherweight division, for example. It doesn't have the most talented, most stacked division yet, and it still needs some looking after and some tending to from the UFC. Same with the flyweight division, albeit they've got their own rankings and they've got 15 competitors all lined up there, so Figueiredo could pretty much pick through them, whereas the women's featherweight division doesn't have a ranking system yet even. So it is a little bit bizarre. But to stick on track, of course, tonight, heavyweight division, Greg Hardy, he missed weight. Originally, they gave him an extra hour. He came back and made weight by half a pound. Came in at 264.5 in the end. But boy, he's a very contrasting individual, and I think maybe that helps. Maybe there's method to the madness, and maybe that's why he's such an athlete that he is. He comes a little bit, with all due respect, a little crazy at times, and it's past. You see it with John Jones, and I think that's where the John Jones and Khabib argument comes in from before, from this week. We see Khabib as someone who's very respected, someone who works with a pride, someone who doesn't break the law, someone who is very much an abiding citizen. He comes in, shows off his martial arts, and he's a professional with it. You don't see him getting into much trouble, if any, outside the cage. Whereas John Jones, as talented as he is inside the cage, outside the cage, it can be a bit of a mess at the time. It seems like at times McGregor and himself at battles, you see mainly at McGregor at the moment, is probably out in the news while John Jones is in it, and it'll flip around it on its head next year maybe. But and you get the same feeling with Greg Hardy, whereas his life outside the cage and before the UFC is going to stay around with him, and hopefully for him, he can maybe rehabilitate himself and become more of a person, who we recognize for fighting rather than outside the cage antics. But then again, we cannot condone or allow people or fighters who have had that sort of past to almost get a free buy, and we go, oh, they're just a fighter. Let's not bring politics or the outside life into the cage, because I feel like it is needed, and it does. And if you say what Colby Compton has done is fine, you can't then also almost restrict maybe what someone else is going to say, because it is freedom of speech. But at the same time, you have to be very careful with what you allow people to do and people to say before you have to terminate their contract. And we John Jones has shown that and ridden his luck, and so is Conor McGregor as well. But yes, I don't know. Greg Hardy is a tough one. You almost want to say, I feel like I'm going to say Greg Hardy is going to win this one, but at the same time, I don't want Greg Hardy to win this one. So you're in a very tough position. But let us know your predictions down below. But yes, I think Greg Hardy gets it done. I think he's a little bit too much of the heavy hitter, but he is going to have to get within arm's reach of Maurice Greene, and maybe it's one where Greene uses the kicks maybe a little bit more. Maybe you see Maurice Greene standing in that those 2 black lines inside the Octagon, and on that monster logo that's there, and we see Greg Hardy more on the outside, I imagine, looking to almost pick him off, looking to almost take a couple of body kicks and then getting on the inside and maybe clinch. But we also interesting to see is wrestling as well. Also, we know Greg Hardy throws heavy hitting power. It'll be interesting to see what he's learned outside the cage, and in camp maybe can show a bit of the more dominant wrestling performance from him, because I think we do need to see that. But we look at the last and final fight now, because we are just running another little bit of time now, and potentially fighter of the year, especially a nominee at least, or deserving another nomination for fighter of the year, is Kevin Holland, trailblazer, 27 years of age, and he's fighting for the third time in consecutive months. He's fought in August, September, and now October, and it looks like he'll be looking to fight in November and December. He's on that Khamzat Chimaev train at the moment in terms of fighting almost week in, week out, but he's returned tonight after coming back off that split decision win against Darren Stewart, and obviously beat Jack Quinn Buckley now, who's maybe a bigger name than Kevin Holland now, albeit he took a loss on that night. He came on a very short notice, the former LFA champion as well. He came and obviously got that jumping back kick knockout that went viral across the globe. So he's got some good wins on the record, and before that, obviously Anthony Hernandez he beat. So he's got 3 wins for this year alone, and he's looking to add a 4th one to that one. But he's up against Charlie Ontiveros, of course. He's coming on a very short notice, so I'm expecting, Jack Quinn Buckley came on a very short notice as well, but so maybe Ontiveros could come in and maybe cause a bit of an upset or drag the fight longer than maybe his Kevin Holland's previous set opponent, which was Moraes, of course. Moraes was supposed to be fighting tonight, but obviously I think he got a positive COVID test, so he had to pull out the fight, or an injury at least. And Charlie came in on very late notice, 19-5 up against 11-6. So 2 very experienced competitors now, albeit both very, very young still. You got one there at 29 in Charlie Ontiveros, and Kevin Holland's 27 years of age. So still got the best of their careers ahead of them. But I do want to see what Kevin Holland's about. He hits hard. He speaks very well. He's a very funny guy, and we saw that in the Buckley fight. Those two, and Darren Stewart as well. Those 3 of them were giving us comedy gold almost in the cage with what they're talking about. Thinking the referee had standing on one point of view, shut up, you're fighting. You're not talking here. Get your job done almost. But I like Kevin Holland. I like what he's about. But looking down his Tapology record here, he does. Every now and then he almost slips up. He gets on a good win streak, and then he loses one. It resets him almost. So hopefully he can get that win tonight and not have to reset him, because before the Anthony Hernandez when he lost to Brendan Allen, but was on a 3-fight win streak. One of those 4 fights that he won was a grappling bout, and then he lost to Thiago Santos before that. So he wins 4, 5, 6, and then he loses one to reset him. So hopefully tonight he gets a very solid win and can start climbing that middleweight division, because he deserves to be in that top 15 almost. He's very much on the cusp, and he deserves some big fights on the horizon for him, whether it's a Khamzat Chimaev, the Martin, the Tory perhaps. He's got someone, and he sells well. Because he speaks so well, he can sell well. So I'm excited to see what he does. And obviously the final fight on that main card is Bobby Greene versus Thiago Moraes. Obviously we know Bobby Greene very well for his passionate post-fight speeches that he's had a lot of times. I believe he walked off for the last one that he took with a win the other night, or a couple of weeks ago now. I believe when the Iranian fighter was sadly with the Iranian fighter, with whatever everything that happened over there in Iran, he put a very passionate. I think he just walked off actually, because he'd only just recently found out what had happened there, so he walked off in dismay and with heartbreak. Obviously, in the prelims, which are starting now, Alexander Hernandez is fighting tonight. Wales' Jack Marshman is fighting tonight on the card as well. So it's a good card. It's not got the most strongest names on the card, so we're off the back of the UFC 254 now. Within this pandemic era that we're in at the moment, the pay-per-views are stacked, and that means that some others do get a good chance, and we've seen that this year on the Fight Night cards. The likes of Jack Quinn Buckley, they're able to make a name of it for themselves off the back of a good Fight Night performance. There's going to be more eyes on it, and it allows the rest of the roster to come through and really show what they're about. Whereas you get the superstars on the pay-per-view at the moment, albeit we've got the likes of Brian Ortega, Korean Zombie, Colby Covington, Woodley on Fight Night cards as well. That Colby Covington Woodley Fight Night card was almost an abomination that it was free for us fans in the UK. That was a pay-per-view worthy card alone. But yes, I think that's a good place to leave it. Will Anderson Silva get his final win in the UFC tonight? Will it be his final win? Maybe even in MMA, but I do think he does go to Bellator or ONE FC. Maybe even PFL if he so does wish to do so. But Uriah Hall also could cause a bit of an upset. We see that spinning hook kick from his Ultimate Fighter days. Could he pull that off again? I don't know. But let's have a quick look at the comments down below as well. Oh, thank you, Kurta. Thank you, Kurta. Okay, Kurta loves a pun. We want your best Halloween pun. You can put it in the group chat later if you want. We want Halloween puns for fighters tonight. Let us know your best one. And give us your prediction for... Hey, you got your shout out, Kurta. You was on screen. Everyone go give Kurta a follow on Twitter, of course. He does a lot of work with Tapology. But I just seen your comment there, lad. Don't you worry. But yes, Anderson Silva, is he the GOAT? We finally got some interaction. Thank you, Kurta. But yes, Anderson Silva the GOAT. I think he's very much in the conversation, as is Khabib and John Jones, of course, and GSP. But I was thinking earlier, of course, it sums up this sport perfectly. How we've got Khabib at 29-0, considered one of the greatest of all time, and we've got Anderson Silva, who's 34-10 and considered one of the greatest of all time. You wouldn't get that in boxing. You don't really get someone who has 10 defeats in boxing, and you're comparing them with Floyd Mayweather. It's very much you got to keep your own. And I think that's where Tyson Fury almost outweighs Anthony Joshua, albeit they might have had very similar fights, very similar level of opponents so far. But yes, Anderson Silva, Uriah Hall, it's going to be a good exhibition bout for kickboxing and Muay Thai, I think. And we're going to get a very good fight tonight. And I'm buzzing to see Anderson Silva for the final time. I wish I'd gotten to the sport a little sooner and seen him in his glory days. But hopefully he can have one more tonight. And we see you guys on the recap on Monday.